Let's talk Michigan football. And that means Aaron McMann is joining me from mlive.com/Wolverines. It's Michigan Ohio State week, Aaron. Doesn't get better than
Greg,
this.
no, it doesn't. Michigan's had some big games this year, but this certainly takes the cake. Probably the biggest game really in the rivalry since I don't know 2016, I'd say.
Really? Why do you think it's bigger than last year?
I mean, both teams 11-0. Ranked 2 and 3. Last year was big. Don't get me wrong, and still, the end result's still the same.
Oh,
The
yeah.
winner's gonna win the East and get to the Big Ten title game. But you got two unbeaten's, ranked 2 and 3. You can't get much bigger than that, really.
Well, Aaron, the big story, it's really simple. And it's about the health of the Wolverines. Because I'm sorry, I just I don't care how much they're trying to paint a rosy picture and hey, we could win, and they need Blake. I don't think there's any question about it. Because since the last time we spoke, and remember we talked about the need, and I know there were some Michigan fans that commented on the video and said, "Well, no, I don't really think that that's necessary. They don't really need the passing game until they need it." Well, we'll find out who's right, and I certainly hope they're right, because that would mean that if they need the passing game, which I think they would definitely, if Blake doesn't play, and I actually think they're going to need it even if Blake plays, we'll find out whether or not JJ can get it done when it matters the most in the biggest of games.
Yeah, I mean, you saw the second half last week against Illinois after Blake went down and they didn't have Donovan Edwards and they were leaning on, third string running back TJ Stokes. They struggled moving the ball
Everybody
on the
was out.
ground.
It was crazy.
Yeah, and they tried to throw the ball and they had some success, but it wasn't anything like I don't know, to me it wasn't sustainable for 4 quarters against Ohio State. So yeah, I mean, they haven't had much of a passing game all year long. They haven't had to lean on it, like you said. They haven't really tried to lean on it. Saturday, they may have to.
All right, let's talk about the injuries. So I know you're even though you're there, I know they're not going to tell you anything. But what do you think? What's going on? What's your guess? Best guess?
Yeah, so I saw Blake Corum in person on Sunday after the game.
Okay.
He did his turkey giveaway outside Ann Arbor. He did it last year, same thing. He gives out 300 turkeys to the community and everything else. He showed up for that. Now he was in sweats, and so you couldn't tell if he had a knee brace on or anything else,
So
but
he
he was
wasn't jumping
limping.
rope or anything.
No, he wasn't. No, he was not.
Okay.
Um, but he was noticeably limping. It wasn't anything serious, but you can tell he was gingerly walking around. So I I tend to think he's going to try and give it a go. Now keep in mind, and this is what Jim Harbaugh told us after the game on Saturday. He said that X-rays were done. There's no structural damage, so nothing. There's no break or anything, and he was cleared to play. It sounds like he couldn't really play much in the second half. He tried. I think he ran for he had one carry. Either him or the coaching staff decided to pull him out afterwards. But I think they're going to suit him up. He's going to try and give it a go. But is he 100%?
No,
I don't think he.
but that's okay. I know we want him to be 100%, but it's better to have him on the field than not. And even a 75% Blake Corum is fine by me, and it helps because the defense is still going to square in on him, and that will then. This is what we talked about. This will open up the opportunity for the passing game because they have to pass football. And if Blake is not 100%, he plays, they have to pass the football. And I'm not talking about dinking and dunking and kicking field goals because we know that's not going to get it done against Ohio State. It's about we need to have. I think Michigan does not win this football game unless we see the big. It could be just one play. It doesn't have to be five. Just unless we see the big passing play. We need the one big passing play. That would be part of a winning game summary in my mind. I think without that, I just don't think they're going to get it done because they're not going to rush for 300 yards like they did last year.
No, I agree, and I would have probably told you that even if Blake and Donovan were healthy, I think they still would have needed to connect on a deep ball. They may need more of it this year, on Saturday, to overcome some of the injuries, assuming Blake and Donovan aren't 100%, and whether they play or not, I don't know, obviously, but they're going to have. I think they're going to need a complete performance of the offense. I think J.J. McCarthy, in effect, becomes the X factor on Saturday. If the running game isn't 100%, he's going to have to scramble and scrape along every yard he can get on the ground. I think he's going to have to put himself in every position possible to get a first down. He's probably going to take some hits. He's probably going to make some mistakes along the way. But I think, assuming the rushing game isn't 100%, this game falls on J.J. McCarthy. He's going to have to make plays through the air. He's going to have to make plays on the ground. Otherwise, I have a hard time envisioning a scenario where Michigan can pull it out. I mean, you saw the recipe they had last year. They wanted to do on the ground. That was the game plan coming into this year. They obviously wanted to do it on the ground. But when your two primary backs are banged up and or not going to play, you got to find a different way. And again, they're not. We talked about they're not really built to win from the passing game, and I don't think they want to do that. You don't want to get into a shootout with Ohio State because there aren't many teams that are going to do that and come out victorious.
That's why the running game is so important, because the clock runs, it shortens the game, and all of that, and that's what you have to do against Ohio State. Like you said, cannot get into one of these 30s type of games, 40s, so forget it. I mean, it's got to be no higher than in the 20s, in the high 20s. That's about as high I think we can go. So, all right. What about Edwards? Because he's had more injury issues over his career than Blake. This was the first time with Blake. And I do have to say this regarding Blake. And I know it wasn't like it happened in this game, but I said this a few weeks ago on one of my other shows. I was really upset about which game was it? I think it was the Michigan State game, when there was about 2 minutes to go in the game and Blake Corum was running the football. And I'm just, what is going, why is he out there? Why? It drives me crazy. A lot of coaches do this. It's not just Harbaugh. I don't know. They just forget what's going on sometimes. They just don't realize, dude, the game's over. Why? There's no need for this. And the reason I bring it up is because, especially with a guy that is as small as Blake, to me, every carry is another carry that I just don't think a running back needs when you're talking about wear and tear. And again, I'm not saying that this is the reason he got hurt, but you do wonder about the workload.
Yeah, it's a valid question, and something Jim was getting ad nauseum early in the year when Blake was getting 20, upwards of 30 carries a game. Now, part of that was because Michigan didn't have much help there. Like you said, Donovan was banged up. He finally came back, I think, 4 or 5 games into the season and was able to kind of get a regular carry load. But he's only had, I think, 3 games this season where he's had over 10 carries. So they've kind of had to lean on Blake all season long to kind of execute this game plan. Now, you could question whether it was smart or not, because you're in a position now where you may not have either one of them on Saturday. Now what?
Yeah.
But I think they generally felt like Blake Corum was their best chance to win. Part of, I mean, and look, I get it. From a schematic standpoint, you accentuate your positives and hide your negatives. And up until this point, Michigan's done a decent job hiding the pass game because they haven't really had to utilize it. But we've been talking for weeks now. What would happen if you had to lean on it? Well, you saw in the second half against Illinois, they couldn't move the football much, and you wonder what it's going to look like Saturday against the Buckeyes.
All right, so Donovan, again, just quickly, your gut instinct on whether or not you think he's going to play?
Oh, yeah, I think he's in a similar situation to Blake. I think he'll try and suit up. He oddly came out of the game 2 weeks ago in the second half. No rhyme or reason for it. No reason given. He was still in uniform and had his head and his helmet on, but never went back into the game. Jim Harbaugh, after the game, hinted that it was some sort of injury. He didn't suit up last week, again, for an injury reason. We have no clarity on what it is. But typically when a guy suits up, I mean, obviously it's one of two things. They definitively thought he wasn't going to be able to play, or it's a long-term situation. So I don't know. I'm less bullish on him playing Saturday, but I could also see a scenario, again, where they suit him up and they try and get him in the game early to see what they have, and then kind of go from there. I mean, if it becomes apparent early on that Donovan can't get going and Blake can't keep going, I think Ohio State will recognize that pretty quickly, and then the pressure kind of comes off defending the run game, and then Michigan's in deep doo-doo.
Yeah,
So
I can't even imagine just gamesmanship wise that either player will not dress. I mean, they're going to
right.
dress whether they play or not. It's just, do they play? We don't know.
Right.
But I don't know. I just think these guys have got to be really hurt to not play. It's not going to be a pain threshold deal. It's going to be like, hey, we can't afford to have this kid go out there and really injure himself. I don't know. My guess is I think they're both going to play. Whether they play more than a down or two, I don't know. But I just get the feeling that they're gonna give it a try.
I'm on board. I mean, after the game on Saturday against Illinois, Jim Harbaugh was asked that question. He basically said, guys who are on the fence about whether they can go or not Saturday will. And I mean, it's a big game. It's the biggest game of the year. It's the reason why a lot of these kids come to Michigan.
Right.
And not only are they going up against the arch rival, but it's on a huge stage. As I mentioned, they're both teams are 11-0. There's a lot riding on this game. Potential trip to the Big Ten championship, another college football playoff. So in a way, I mean, everything rides on this game. You lose, and you lose all of that. So I think they're going to try and play as many guys as possible. Again, I think the running backs will suit up. What type of productivity and production they get out of them, I don't know. But it's certainly going to, I think, determine the path of and success of Michigan's offense.
All right. Let's say Corum and Edwards, whatever happens in the beginning of the game, they're not there in the second half. They may not even be there in the first half. Is it C.J. Stokes? Is that the guy? And if he starts, he's going to get 20 carries.
C.J. Stokes would be the next guy up. True freshman. Jim Harbaugh really likes him a lot. Really gravitated toward him on the recruiting trail. 3-star kid, really underrated. He's gotten a lot of carries this year. Michigan wasn't afraid of getting him involved early in the year, which I think bodes well for his future. He's played in some of these bigger games, but yeah, he hasn't had the carry load that a Blake Corum has had, or hasn't had the success, single game success that maybe a Donovan Edwards has.
Sure.
So to lean on him for a full game would, I think, be asking a lot,
of course,
especially given it's on the road in Ohio State.
We don't want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan may have to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's him. They've got Tavier Dunlap, a redshirt freshman who played sparingly last year, but to give you an idea of where he falls on the depth chart, he got passed this year by C.J. Stokes. So Michigan clearly isn't very confident what they have there. And then they've got a walk-on by the name of Isaiah Gash, got some carries Saturday against Illinois, had that big fourth down catch that actually saved them the game. So they may get him involved too. So, but nonetheless, I mean, those aren't the guys you want to be leaning on against going up against Ohio State. If it's a non-conference game, that's one thing. If it's a Rutgers, that's one thing. But man, in your biggest game of the year, and you're relying on those guys, if that ends up being the case, and again, we don't know. It's going to be a tough time for Michigan, I think.
Okay, now losing all that was important early on in the season, and no word yet whether or not he'll be back. By the way. Or if he's going to go pro?
All had season-ending surgery. Gosh, maybe a month ago now. He called it life-changing. I don't know what the reason is. He hasn't talked to reporters. He hasn't explained what the situation is. He's out for the rest of the year, so he won't be back. Luke Schoonmaker's done a good job of stepping in. He's basically turned into Eric Hall 2.0 up until last week, and I think it still stands to this day. He's the second leading pass catcher on Michigan's roster. Again, another indictment of the receivers and maybe the passing game. But he's turned into a viable weapon.
And then what happened?
He's, again, another guy who didn't play on Saturday. He's injured, I was told. But he did dress. So
he was close.
A situation where, like, Donovan – right. So he was in uniform going into the Illinois game. Came out for pregame warm-ups.
Oh, that's good.
From my understanding, it was a game time decision. Good. So I think he'll play, and he'll probably be close to 100% for Saturday, which bodes well because he ended up being a favorite target of J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy likes him. He's got reliable hands. He can get open. He can get yards after the catch. So he would certainly help.
And by the way, do you know if All will any word yet whether or not he'll come back or whether he'll just go pro?
Don't know yet. I think the assumption going into the year that he was going to end up going pro just because he had a high NFL stock on him. I think you and I talked about it, earlier in the year. Talking to some NFL scouts in the community, they really liked his frame and his ability. What the injury and surgery means, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if he came back just to try and bounce back. But if his stock remains high, it certainly wouldn't shock me either if he went to the NFL.
All right, on paper, and we talked about this again, that the talent is there at receiver, but what's been the problem? Like, are we seeing players unable to get off the line of scrimmage properly? Are we seeing too many drops, bad route running, bad run blocking? Is there anything that we can point to of why? You got Johnson, Wilson, you have Anthony, and you have Bell. Those are talented receivers. So, any reason why you believe that more of them haven't stepped up, like Ronnie Bell? I
think
should
it's
include Roman Wilson because he's had a pretty good season as well, even though his numbers could be a lot bigger.
Yeah, I think it's really an all of the above scenario. I think you have some guys that have trouble getting open. Early in the year they were using Roman Wilson heavy in the screen game. He was getting big chunk plays and big yards and everything else. As the season has gone on, he's missed a couple of games due to injury and illness and everything else. But teams have kind of schemed up and realized how they want to utilize Roman Wilson, so they've kind of taken him away. Ronnie Bell's gotten his. He hasn't been that game-changing receiver. Maybe some thought would eventually be. But he's been a reliable hand. And then other than that, Michigan hasn't gotten much. You mentioned Angelo Anthony. He's had a couple situations where he's had drop balls. There have been situations where, with the receiving core in general, where J.J. McCarthy just overthrown guys. Yeah. So it's really been all the above scenario. And look, they haven't thrown the ball a ton either. If you look at JJ's stat line as pass attempts this year, he's in the bottom of the Big Ten in terms of the starting quarterback. So they're just not trying to throw the ball much. So I think when you combine that all together, you get a picture of that, just an unknown. Like, you get a bunch of guys who could be stars, but they haven't tried the ton, and when they have thrown the ball, it's been a mixed bag. I mean, they've tried the deep ball that hasn't been able to hit. They had 2 drop balls Saturday against Illinois. Roman Wilson had a ball go through his hands. So did Angelo Anthony. So I think all that in a blender, and you get with the passing roles that they've had. They haven't been able to kind of find a rhythm, and that's been a big issue.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I mean, when they're not getting enough attempts, it's sort of like an outfielder that in baseball, and the pitcher is a ground ball pitcher, and the outfielder, and you could say vice versa, and the fielder is lucky to get 1 or 2 attempts a game, and he's got to sit there the entire game and wait for his time, and sometimes your concentration lapses. Same thing in football. If you're out there 70 snaps, 80 snaps, and you get your name called twice, it's not so easy to come up with it, when it's time, as opposed to, hey, I got 15 opportunities. I got 10 targets. I got 7 targets. So good point. Okay. Defensively, Mike Morris, speaking of players that shouldn't have been on the field in a blowout game against Nebraska, and almost killed Michigan's season because they kept them out there too long. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad, or at least we were being told it wasn't as bad as it was. So will Mike Morris play this week?
He's another guy who dressed
and was close
on Saturday against Illinois. Yeah, it was close. He again went through the warm-ups. Did all that stuff, and there was a game time decision to hold him out. So he's a similar situation, I think, as Schoonmaker, where I think he'll play and he'll be close to 100%, which I think is vital, because he's kind of emerged as Michigan's leading sack guy, he's leading pass rusher. Now, he's not the David Ajabo, he's not the Aiden Hutchinson of a year ago, but I think you want him on the field as much as possible. So I anticipate them getting him back on Saturday.
Okay, now. What do you think he's looking at as far as the biggest matchup defensively for Michigan versus Ohio State's offense? Because they did a really good job last year, but as you mentioned, it's a few guys, especially those 2 big ones up front, that are not there. So that means CJ is going to have more time to throw the football, and it's going to be a lot more scarier. So where's the matchup? I would think in the secondary. Starting there, defense to offense, what's the big one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's whoever ends up going against Marvin Harrison Jr., right? It'll either be DJ Turner or Will Johnson or Jamon Green, whoever Michigan ends up matching him up against. But the thing about Michigan's corners is, I mean, they've been fine this year, but they haven't been elite. There have been situations where they've been targeted at times. I mean, DJ Turner's been targeted. Jamon Green was targeted by opponents. So they're almost going to need to probably all game long use a 5 and 6 man backfield. They're going to need a couple of safeties to help. Because I have a hard time envisioning Michigan winning one-on-one matchups and trying to slow this Ohio State passing offense down. I just don't see it happening. That's clearly, I think, defensively where Ohio State has the edge in the passing game. They're going to try and run the ball. It's been apparent that Ryan Day he's tried all season long to show that this Ohio State team can hand the ball off and run and kind of mimic what Michigan does. Maybe not to the same degree, but yeah, I mean, Ohio State's going to throw the ball. They're going to get out, move down the field as quickly as possible. So whoever goes up against Marvin Harrison, that's the matchup I'm watching. Because at this point in the game, I mean, Harrison has shown that he is Ohio State's most reliable, best receiver. And look, we're all assuming Jackson Smith and Najigma isn't playing on Saturday. I just talked to one of my fellow Ohio State writer at Cleveland.com earlier today, but they don't expect him to play either. But
well, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's whoever goes up against Marvin Harrison,
okay.
You got to slow him down and take Michigan and try and take, or at least slow Ohio State's receiver.
And who's the best? Who's most capable?
If you would have asked me a few weeks ago, I would have told you Jamon Green. Then he was involved in that Michigan State tunnel incident. His playing time has been kind of cut back. He suffered a concussion, so I don't know what state he's in. Will Johnson's emerged, but he's a true freshman.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to trust a true freshman on the road
in a game like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, unless he's Charles Woodson, I don't know.
Right. Now, he could be one day, but I don't think he's there yet. DJ Turner is probably going to be the guy.
Okay.
I mean, if I was a coach, he'd be the guy, and then obviously I'd bracket Harrison with a safety, and then kind of go from there. I mean, Michigan's done a very good job this year of emphasizing the defensive backfield. Jesse Minter, their coordinator, is a defensive back guy. They'll probably use a lot of nickel backfields, and then they'll have to hopefully force some mistakes and just slow them down.
And Sandra still is also going to have to come up and play the way that he has played, as we talked about last time. So his game really look. The thing is if you take a look at Michigan's defense this year, and they did it again, giving up 17 points to Illinois. So I don't need to tell you that, but it's the third time that they've given up 17 points, which is actually the kind of benchmark, because there's only been one team that has scored more than 17 points against Michigan this year. And it happened to be the best passing offense that Michigan's played all year, Maryland. And Maryland just put 30 on Ohio State last week in a high-scoring game. That is what is concerning, because we know the schedule, we understand it, we know we haven't played exactly, the top teams, especially in the passing game. That's the thing to be really concerning about, because it's we don't have a lot of history to go on except that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this topic up, because last week I wrote it at MLive.com, and I was kind of beating the drum, but Michigan hasn't played a good offense all year long. Their highest ranked offense they've gone up against was Penn State. Average ranking in their opposing offenses this year has been about 100. So those statistics that folks want to look at from Michigan's defense, the number one ranked total yards, number one scoring defense in the country, I mean, that's all fine and dandy.
Yeah.
But look at the competition they've been going up
Yes.
against. I mean, the Big Ten they're down this year offensively. Michigan's non-conference schedule is not very good. They just haven't been tested a ton. And I asked Jesse Minter, their defensive coordinator, last week, actually, I asked him point blank, do you feel like you've been tested yet? And you can clearly tell his response, although he didn't admittedly say no. You could tell that he felt like the tests were coming. He even said that the book hadn't been written yet in this defense. So I mean, they did a decent job against Illinois. Tommy DeVito is a very good quarterback. Chase Brown's a good running back. They held them in check. But Illinois and Ohio State are two different beasts, and how they handle C.J. Stroud, the mobility in his arm and those receivers, Gosh, I don't know. And you're right. You're absolutely right to draw upon that Maryland game because Michigan really struggled in the first half, slowing Maryland down. They kind of for 2 quarters there, they did whatever they wanted to, and especially in the passing game. Now they had answers in the second half, which has been Michigan's calling card all season long. But we'll see if they can kind of put together full 4 quarters here against the Buckeyes.
Okay, and then offensively, biggest matchup. Like, what is it along the offensive line? Of course, we know Ohio State has a very dangerous pass rusher. So, is that the matchup?
Yeah, I really like Tommy Eichenberg, the linebacker at Ohio State. He's a good. I think they're probably going to match him up against either McCarthy or whoever. It's Corum, whoever lines up at running back. But yeah, I mean, Michigan's up front. If Michigan wins this game, they're going to do it up front in the trenches at tackle and guard and kind of pushing Ohio State around and getting some type of production in the ground game. That's the only scenario where I see Michigan winning. And we talked about it. The passing game is iffy. I think Ohio State does a decent job there, but Michigan's going to have to push them. It's going to have to be a carbon copy of last year. They're going to have to push them around. Michigan's going to have to establish dominance to the line of scrimmage and then break off some big runs. It's as simple as that. This offense hasn't changed a ton from last year.
And the offensive line, do you think the offensive line is better than last year's?
That's a good question. I think that's been a question everyone's been trying to get an answer to all season long, and it's difficult to answer because they've been so banged up. I think there have been 4 or 5 games this year where the true 5 starters have played together. So there's been a lot of rotating, a lot of guys coming in and out, so it's been hard to tell. But I will say this: they did a really. If you go back to that Penn State game a month ago, whatever it was now, they bullied Penn State, and that was, I think, the wake up call that hey, this Michigan offensive line and this rushing attack could be as good as it was last year, if not better. Again, the problem is they haven't been tested a ton, so you don't really know if it's a mirage or is it real. But we'll find out Saturday.
Well,
from a line perspective and just from a size perspective, Michigan hasn't played anything like this against Ohio State. So I think we'll find out early on. I say, by the end of the first quarter, we'll have an idea of whether Michigan get anything going on the ground and whether they stand a chance to win.
Well, really, if you look at it, though, I don't think Ohio State's defense is better than last year's because it couldn't have been, that was as bad as a defense that they've had on a good team, on a really good team in a while. But look, they're better, but they're still not. Hey, we're gonna have a hard time moving the ball against them because they're that good. They're not at that level yet. They've got better players and a better scheme, but
yes,
I mean, Penn State put 31 on them. Maryland put 30 on them. We can go down the list. We talked about Michigan's 17 number. Ohio State's got a lot of teams that have scored over 20. About 5, I think. Mm-hmm. So maybe 6. So, again, good defense, better than last year, but not an immovable object. Not something that that's why Michigan's offensive line and their running game, if they're healthy, I don't see any reason why Michigan can't kind of be similar. Again, they're not going to rush for 300 yards, be similar to what they did last year. But they're going to have to be a little bit more explosive in the passing game, like we talked about, because Ohio State's going to score more points. It's just going to happen. So unless Michigan winds up with turnovers and things of that nature, but I'm not so sure that's going to happen. So
no, I agree. I don't think, despite the statistics, I don't know if this Michigan defense is as good as it was last year. They obviously had they had some stars last year.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think Ohio State's going to have a little bit easier time moving down the field and scoring. And again, it's going to be up to Michigan where they can control clock, control the line of scrimmage, and do what they want to do. And you're right, if they're able to, this game could be competitive. It could be a close one. It could come down to the wire, just like a couple in 2016. Another variable that folks maybe forget about, but this game is in Columbus, and there are 2 guys on the Michigan roster currently that last played in Columbus in 2018, Ronnie Bell and Jake Moody. So a lot of these guys are going into the horseshoe on Saturday not knowing what they're getting themselves into. I think they do. They've cited Iowa and playing at Nebraska and Penn State, which are some incredible, atmospheres, but they don't touch Ohio State. So I'm really curious to see how this Michigan team deals with the environment, especially in the first couple of drives.
But I will say this, even though Michigan was much better last year up front with their 2-star pass rushers, I actually think yeah, we know Daxon Hill was really a top player, but I actually think they're and the statistics back it up. But I actually think that they have a better secondary. I think their DBs are better, and that is important when you're taking on Ohio State. So, got to get enough of a pass rush, though.
Yeah,
Doesn't have to be as good
better.
as last year, but a good enough pass rush where Stroud's just not sitting there all day. As long as they get enough of a pass rush, I think the secondary can compensate.
Yeah, make them uncomfortable. Make them think twice. Make them not get into a rhythm. That's oftentimes how a quarterback has a big game. They're just in rhythm. They have time to throw the ball. There's no questions. You just got to get enough pressure. They ain't got to get home all the time.
Yeah.
They don't have to rack up a ton of sacks, but hurry him, get him moving, make him, maybe make a mistake, and that's how a game flips.
Okay, so before I let you go, I have to ask you about the scenario. Okay, everything is really starting to go Michigan and Ohio State's way with the rest of the top teams because there's been a lot of teams losing, including Tennessee's loss, which was monumental last week. There is a distinct possibility that the loser of this game, as long as it's a competitive football game, is going to wind up in the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's got to be competitive. It's got to be a one-score game. It's got to be going to overtime. Michigan loses late, or Ohio State loses late, whatever.
Unless, of course, no Blake Corum, no Edwards. Michigan loses 27-10, and the committee goes, well, we understand. I mean, the guys were out. They're expected to be back if there's a playoff. Okay. I think they'd understand that. I really do.
Yeah, it would be a possibility. And then the playoff has said that they do take into account injuries. So that would probably factor in their decision. But other things need to happen, too. I think you need TCU to lose to give them that one loss to force them out. You need USC to lose, ideally, to Notre Dame.
And these are all possible.
Absolutely. And LSU
and Georgia to beat LSU.
If all those things happen, which are yeah, right. And if all these things are happen, the dominoes fall. Yeah, I mean, who else you put in there? It's like you got this long list of
two lost teams. Yeah, and you're going to say, no, we're not going to put a one-loss Michigan or Ohio State in when they lost to the second or third ranked team in the country with their only a loss. Come on.
Right, and it was close, and I think that's key. I really believe it's got to be a close game, and it very well could be. But yeah, they're both in the driver's seat at this point. You play a competitive game Saturday, look good doing it. They got the loser will have a strong chance again. And I think more so for Ohio State. I think because Ohio State looked at as having a stronger schedule, stronger non-conference. That win over Notre Dame is looking better as the weeks go on,
especially if Notre Dame beats USC.
Right, correct. So Big Ten very well could have two teams in the playoff. It'd be the first time ever.
Well, if this is going to happen, this is going to be the year it could happen, because this doesn't really happen very often with the SEC. But look, that's why I'm glad that in a couple of years we're not going to have to worry about this, because it's really unfair. We know how strong the SEC is, and it's almost impossible. I'm surprised that more and more seasons we haven't seen this kind of parity in the SEC with two lost teams. It's just so tough. But hey, maybe it all works out if Michigan loses. But if it's a close game, like you said, I think that's the key. I think if Michigan loses, I think we all need to kind of, all right, well, hey, go Notre Dame, or go whoever the USC competitor is going to be in the championship game of the Pac-12. Go Kansas State. If Kansas State plays them in the championship game, that kind of thing, and Georgia beat LSU. So these are all very possible possibilities. And by the way, we're saying all of those teams, but in reality, even if one of those teams makes it, still a chance. So even if TCU runs the table, Georgia, two Big Ten teams, that could still happen. So yeah, I'm actually beginning to think more and more likely that that's going to be the case, but we'll see. I mean, let's hope that we don't, as Michigan fans, don't have to worry about that. Take care of business on Saturday, because the team hasn't won in Columbus since when? 2000?
2000.
That's incredible.
In a long time. It is. You think about it.
That is
22 years ago.
Wow. So
yeah,
let's one peg last year, another peg in Columbus. So let's not have to wait a couple more years for that peg to drop. So why not? Let's take advantage of it. Let's hope JJ comes up big, because we need JJ to come up big. And if he's going to come up big, why not do it in the most important game? Let's hope everybody's healthy. That's obviously very important. And Aaron, what are you going to be doing for the game, and how are you going to be covering it for M Live and any of the podcasts that you're going to be on?
Yeah, I'll be down there for the game, going down Friday afternoon. Looking forward to it. We haven't been down, like I said, we haven't been down there since 2018. So it's always a crazy environment. It's always a lot of fun. So we'll be there, covering it live, mlive.com/Wolverines. And we'll be discussing it afterwards on the Wolverine Confidential podcast.
Right after, huh? What is it usually like? Just a few minutes after the game?
Yeah, you
have to wait for the press conferences and so forth.
Yeah, we'll probably wait till Sunday, but we'll have it up by Sunday night. Yep.
Aaron, I appreciate it. I know it's a real busy week with the game, and of course, Thanksgiving is tomorrow. So I really do appreciate it. And the next time we talk, fingers crossed that we're previewing either a Big Ten championship game or nothing worse than a playoff game. So I appreciate it, Aaron. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone watching.
You got it. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Go Blue!